Welcome, folks. I'm just going to show y'all something. Y'all, a lot of you say there was a lot of white slave owners, but really, I better blow y'all fucking minds here, because I'm about to show y'all something y'all would not want to listen to. But I'm going to show it to y'all, because I'm telling you the truth. There's more. Yeah, there might have been white slave owners, but there's actual black slave owners too. So this is going to show you right here. So
that no historian has ever been able to forget. It reads, God have mercy on us all. The clerk who wrote it wasn't being poetic. He was warning the future. The document marked the legal union between a white widow from a Creole family and the man who had once been her husband's slave. His name was Moses. Within 8 months, he'd gone from property to proprietor, from the fields to the manor, from shackles to silk. And yet the transformation wasn't miraculous. It was engineered. Because between the night his master was found dead with a rifle across his lap, and the morning Moses became the legal owner of Belarive Plantation, something happened. Something that forced even the church to seal its records. They said Moses was lucky. They said his rise was divine providence. But in the back rooms of Louisiana's elite, they whispered another word: curse. Tonight, you're not hearing another story of slavery and freedom. You're hearing how a man dismantled the very hierarchy that created him. How he turned a system built to break him into his weapon, and the cost was counted in blood. By the summer of 1852, Belarive Plantation was a kingdom of shadows. 800 acres of sugarcane, blood, and silence. Its master, Henry Beauchamp, was a man who believed power was inherited, not earned. But what he didn't understand was that some men learn power by surviving it. Moses had been born there, beneath those same oaks draped in Spanish moss, and from the moment he could walk, he studied the world that enslaved him. He memorized the ledgers. He watched how money moved, how lies became laws, and how faith was weaponized to keep men obedient. Henry saw intelligence in Moses and mistook it for loyalty. He let him into his study, into the books, into the business. He gave him proximity, not realizing that proximity to power is how power is learned. By the time Henry recognized what Moses truly was, a man who understood, it was already too late. You see, the enslaved were never as powerless as history wants you to believe. They listened. They observed. They waited. And when a system builds itself on fear, it doesn't take an army to collapse it. It takes one man who no longer believes in its spell. Moses was that man, and Belarive was about to become his altar. The night Henry Beauchamp died, the air was thick enough to choke a prayer. The river had gone still, unnaturally still, like it was holding its breath. Henry had locked himself in his study, surrounded by ledgers, letters, and a bottle of claret he'd barely touched. Hours later, they'd find him slumped across his desk, a rifle balanced neatly on his lap, blood splattered across the wall like a confession. Officially, it was ruled a suicide, but men who knew Henry knew better. He was ambitious, calculating, and greedy, but he wasn't weak. The coroner's notes were sealed. The doctor who examined the body left behind a private addendum describing a powder burns inconsistent with self-infliction, and strangest of all, Henry's expression. Not terror, not pain, but recognition. As if in the last second of his life, he saw the truth standing right in front of him. They buried him beneath the live oaks 5 days later. His widow, Celeste, wore black lace and said nothing, but witnesses swore she never shed a tear. Moses stood just behind her in the funeral procession, calm, silent, unreadable. To the white men of Ascension Parish, he was still a slave. But that day in the suffocating Louisiana heat, Moses stopped being anyone's property. After Henry's burial, Belarive entered a kind of twilight, where rules still existed, but no one believed in them anymore. The overseers barked orders, but even the field hands sensed the shift. Power had changed hands, even if no one dared to name it. Moses moved through the estate with quiet authority. He spoke little, but everything still functioned as if he were in command. The widow Celeste leaned on him for counsel, just as her husband once had. At first, that seemed practical. Moses understood the accounts, the contracts, the debts. But soon, the boundary between servant and master blurred. He was seen entering her chambers at night. He was seen leaving at dawn. The Greenleaf brothers, white overseers, resented him with a hatred that burned like scripture. They whispered to each other that this wasn't natural, that the world was bending the wrong way, and maybe it was. because every empire built on cruelty eventually feeds on itself. Within 2 months, the Greenleaf brothers were dead, one thrown from a horse, the other found drowned in the river. Accidents, they said. But people whispered that Belerive had become cursed ground, not by ghosts, but by justice finally learning to speak in flesh. By autumn of 1852, the parish records listed something that should have been impossible under every law of the South. A black man, formerly enslaved, now the legal owner of the very plantation he'd been born on. The deed bore his signature, written in a precise, deliberate hand, Moses Beauchamp, the same name as his former master. Rumors spread through Louisiana like wildfire. Some said Celeste had lost her mind, bewitched by a conjure man who used charms and whispers to seize her husband's estate. Others claimed Moses had found papers, hidden ledgers, confessions, something powerful enough to blackmail the entire parish into submission. But the truth was darker. Every man who questioned the legitimacy of his rise, every priest, every merchant, every neighbor, died within the year. One fell from a carriage. Another's home caught fire in the night. None were investigated. The parish police, the clergy, even the courts, looked the other way. It was as if the laws of the old world had inverted. For the first time in Louisiana's history, a white woman was introducing her black husband at formal gatherings, and she did so not with shame, but with defiance. Behind them, the portrait of Henry Beauchamp still hung, watching the impossible unfold. When the parish priest refused to bless their union, Celeste and Moses married in a quiet ceremony at dawn, witnessed only by 2 servants and the wind that moved through the cane fields. The clerk who recorded the marriage scribbled his now famous note in the margin, "God have mercy on us all." But mercy had nothing to do with what was happening at Belerive. From that morning forward, the plantation became a study in reversal. The man who once bowed his head now sat at the head of the table. The same overseer's whip that once marked his back now hung above the fireplace as a trophy. Yet Moses didn't rule through cruelty. He ruled through silence, through presence. Workers obeyed him without being told why. White visitors spoke to him carefully, as if fearing some invisible power behind his calm gaze. Celeste moved beside him like a ghost resurrected, no longer the wilting widow, but a woman awakening to the dangerous freedom of her choice. They said her voice changed, lower, steadier, almost as if it belonged to someone else. But under the candlelight, when she looked at Moses, her expression wasn't love, it was faith, and faith in the wrong hands becomes a weapon sharper than steel. By the spring of 1853, Belerive was unrecognizable. The laughter of the planter elite no longer echoed in its halls. The dinner parties ceased. The church bells in Ascension Parish rang for others, but never again for Belerive. Those who dared to visit said the plantation felt alive, as if it was listening. The air itself carried tension like static before a storm. Moses had begun something that terrified both the powerful and the powerless. He rewrote order. He paid wages to former slaves, bought neighboring land, and allowed no white overseers to remain. The newspapers ignored him. The church denounced him in whispers, yet no one acted. Because something about him made men hesitate. Even his enemies admitted. He looked at you as if he saw through you, as if he could measure your fear, your greed, your worth in seconds. Those who underestimated him disappeared quietly, their names erased from parish records. Celeste kept the books herself now, her handwriting neat but increasingly uneven, like someone caught between devotion and dread. Some nights, they said, music drifted from the main house, a piano playing slow, haunting notes. But when locals rode past the gates, every window was dark. Belerive had become more than land. It was a covenant. What made Moses different wasn't ambition. It was understanding. He grasped what most men never do. Power doesn't come from ownership. It comes from perception. He didn't need to kill every enemy. He only needed them to believe he could. He studied the same systems that enslaved him and learned their language better than their architects. Every transaction, every document, every handshake with a white merchant was a psychological performance. He mirrored their confidence, their arrogance, their divine entitlement, and reflected it back at them until they could no longer tell who truly held control. Celeste once said in a letter that he moved as if guided by something beyond himself. Some claimed he studied African mysticism in secret, that he spoke to shadows in the old slave quarters, performing rites that predated Christianity itself. Others believed he had simply seen the truth too clearly, that once a man understands the machinery of human control, He stops being human altogether. Belerive thrived. The harvests were record-breaking. The debts vanished, and yet every success felt cursed. For those who looked into Moses' eyes swore they saw something ancient looking back, something that had outlived chains, masters, and God himself. Then came the night the river turned red. It was the summer flood of 1854, one of the worst Louisiana had ever seen. Entire towns drowned in silence. Livestock floated past the fields. The swollen Mississippi carried secrets, dragging the remains of men and beasts alike. But at Belerive, the water never crossed the gate. It stopped inches from the fence line, as if some invisible force held it back. When dawn came, every neighboring plantation lay ruined, except Moses's. The surviving planters called it witchcraft. The clergy declared it blasphemy. Yet no one could explain what they saw. Dead fish piled like offerings at the edge of Belerive's fields, the water shimmering crimson under the morning light. Celeste stood barefoot in it, murmuring prayers no one recognized, and Moses watched her from the veranda, expression unreadable. From that day he was no longer called Moses Barchab. Locals renamed him Leroy now, the Black King. They said he could command storms, silence revolts, and curse men with a single look. But power like that demands a price. And by winter, those who once served him began vanishing one by one, called into the swamps at night by voices that sounded almost human. Almost. By 1855, Belerive had become a forbidden name. Travelers refused to take the river road that passed its gates after sundown. They said the lanterns in the main house never went out, that shadows moved behind the curtains even when no one lived there anymore. Parish records show no births, no deaths, no sales, just silence. But in that silence, stories grew. Some claimed Celeste had gone mad, wandering the cane rose in her wedding dress, calling for her dead husband. Others swore she was pregnant again, though she'd aged far past childbearing years. The few who dared approach said they saw her at the window, her hand resting on her stomach, whispering in a language that didn't belong to this world. Moses had stopped appearing in town. Then, the last known sighting of him was on a moonless night, kneeling in the flooded fields, his reflection moving opposite him in the water. The sheriff sent men to investigate, but they never returned. Days later, their horses were found grazing by the roadside, reins torn and eyes wide with terror. Whatever lived at Belerive by then, it wasn't bound by laws, nor by death. It was something older, something that had finally remembered its name. The decade that followed erased Belerive from the map, but not from memory. After the war, Union surveyors found the land abandoned, the mansion half sunk into the earth as if being swallowed by time itself. No human remains were discovered, only traces of ritual, ash circles in the cellar, bones arranged in spirals, words etched into the stone in both Latin and Yoruba. They burned what they could, buried the rest, and marked the property as condemned. Yet strange things continued. Workers hired to clear the fields disappeared within weeks. Compass needles spun wildly near the foundation. One officer recorded hearing whispers under the soil, dozens of voices speaking in perfect unison, repeating one name, Moses. The church demanded exorcism. The military sealed the grounds. But at night, travelers still saw light moving across the riverbank, golden and slow, like lanterns carried by unseen hands. Some believed Moses had transcended death, that Belerive had become his kingdom below the roots. Others thought it was a warning, that the plantation system itself had been cursed by the very souls it devoured. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain, Belerive hadn't died. It had only changed form, waiting for another generation to disturb its silence. In 1871, the silence broke. A railroad company purchased the condemned land, intending to build a line through the overgrown fields. The foreman, a man named Randall Pierce, laughed at the old superstitions. He brought 50 men, dynamite, and steel. Within 3 days, they began to unearth things the parish had long buried. Beneath the foundation of the old mansion, they discovered a staircase descending into the ground, 37 steps cut from limestone, leading to a sealed iron door. The door bore no handle, only a single symbol carved deep into its surface, a crown of thorns encircling an eye. Pierce ordered it opened. They used hammers, chisels, and finally gunpowder. When the door gave way, a rush of air burst out so cold it extinguished their lanterns. One man swore he heard chanting from below. Another claimed to see faint blue light pulsing from the depths. That night, 3 workers went missing. The next morning, Their tools lay arranged in perfect circles where they had stood. Pierce shut the site down immediately. But 2 days later, the company records show something chilling. A new deed had been filed for the land, signed in elegant handwriting. The name was unreadable, except for the first word, Moses. The deed confused everyone. No one in the region carried that name, and yet the signature matched the handwriting from 1852 exactly. Archivists assumed it was a hoax until the ink was tested. It wasn't ink at all, but oxidized blood. The company tried to continue construction, but the men refused to return. Rumors spread that the tunnels beneath Belariv were still breathing, exhaling a strange metallic wind at night. One worker who'd fled told newspapers that the air hummed like a choir buried underground. Pierce disappeared soon after, last seen near the Mississippi docks, muttering that Other King was awake again. When the company sent federal inspectors, they found the site deserted. Rails twisted like vines, the soil blackened, trees bending unnaturally inward as if drawn toward the old cellar. The lead inspector filed one final note before abandoning the survey. This ground feels aware. It listens. Within a year, every map of Ascension Parish quietly erased the Belariv property line. Locals said that if you stood near the old levee at dusk, you could hear faint piano notes drifting from where the house once stood, and a woman's voice humming, waiting for the river to rise again. In 1903, a historian from Baton Rouge, named Dr. Elion Marin, became obsessed with the Belariv case. He'd found fragments of Celeste's letters in a monastery archive, pages smudged, brittle, and water-stained. They told a story unlike any ghost tale Louisiana had ever known. In one, Celeste wrote, "He is no longer bound to flesh. He moves through sound, through reflection. The river obeys him." Another read, "They thought they owned him, but they were only his mirrors. He wanted to see what fear looked like wearing a crown." Marin spent 3 years searching for the iron door. Locals warned him it was gone, swallowed by the swamp. But in March of 1906, he sent one last letter to his colleague in New Orleans. "I found the staircase. 37 steps exactly. The air tastes like salt and metal. I hear the hum they spoke of." He was never heard from again. When authorities reached the site, they found no staircase, no door, only footprints leading into a patch of flooded cane, then stopping abruptly. The water there never rippled, not even in wind. For decades after, locals swore that on humid nights, the ground itself whispered his name back. By the mid-20th century, Belariv had become legend. Stories of Moses, once a slave, now a king, circulated like cautionary scripture. Children dared each other to run past